Three European countries have this Wednesday recognised Palestine as a state. Ireland, Norway and Spain add their names to 9 EU states that have already acknowledged Palestine since 1988. Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. Back then, of course, part of the Soviet Union. Recognition of Palestine was approved by then. And also Malta and Cyprus. And then in 2014, Sweden. Now we can add Ireland, Norway and Spain, with Slovenia to join this group come the end of this month. So the move today by Ireland, Norway and Spain comes 12 days after the United Nations voted to make Palestine a full member. Israel recalled its ambassadors to Dublin, Madrid and Oslo as a result of today's declarations of support and recognition for a Palestinian state. Things are moving. Let's get the analysis. Let's bring in our guest, Nomi Bar-Yaacov, who's Associate Fellow on the International Security Programme at Chatham House. Nomi, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. We appreciate your time. Can I start by asking you first, we've got many things to go through, so I'll try and be quick. How are you reading this latest declaration then about Palestinian statehood from the Irish, the Spanish and the Norwegians?
Well, I think it was to be expected. It was just only a question of time. And I think they're just showing that they're somewhat fed up with the fact that the current Israeli government is showing no desire whatsoever to even contemplate a Palestinian state at any given moment in time. And I think that was a strong message that they were sending, that the only solution to the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with dreadful ramifications, in the region, is to have two states side by side. And this was their way of making a statement that it's time to get cracking on it.
And that this comes 12 days after the UN voted to make Palestine a full member of the UN. Again, it's adding more weight, more momentum?
Correct. I mean, there's a trajectory here. There are now 144 states that have formally declared Palestine as a state. So it's as you mentioned correctly, Slovenia is the next one, and I'm sure there will be other countries to follow. And it's just time to look at how we resolve the conflict. We're 7.5 months into this war, following horrendous atrocities that Hamas committed on the 7th of October. But one needs to sort of figure out what the end game is and then go kind of in reverse engineering and work out what the benchmarks are. And the end game is to have two states, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, side by side, both states sovereign, independent, and secure. And these countries, that Norway, Spain and Ireland, among the other 141, believe that this is a move that will provide Israel security. I mean, the Norwegian foreign minister stated today very clearly that he believes that this is in Israel's national security interests. The one element that I feel is missing, and very strongly missing, is that there's a failure on the part of these countries to explain to Israel how a Palestinian state is going to provide provide security for Israel, in the sense that the idea is to have normalization. The idea is that not only that there'll be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, Israel will normalize relations with the Arab states that Israel doesn't have a relationship with, namely Saudi Arabia, the key state that is in question, and all the others. So it's basically an implementation of the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, later revised in 2007, calling for recognition of two states, Israel and Palestine, side by side along the 1967 line, and the quid pro quo would be normalization for Israel with the Arab states. I mean, that's a very brief summary. Happy to go into
it's a brief summary, though, but we appreciate your clarity on this because it is a very complicated issue. And for many people who don't understand and have your depth of knowledge on this, these things are just buzzing around in a circle. Let me, before we come back to you, bring in, you mentioned him earlier, Norway's Foreign Minister, Espen Barth Eide. Let's take a listen to what he was saying earlier.
Yeah.
And I'll bring you back in.
Sure.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks.
Deliberate mistake. That was Simon Harris, the Taoiseach of Ireland, speaking earlier. His words, in many ways, I think, echoing what the other capital cities were saying about this one, that there is a recognition of the Palestinian situation, this Palestinian state, but also, by the same token, a recognition of Israel as well. So this is actually support for Israel. Do you think that's a message Israel is hearing, Nomi?
No, I don't think it's a message Israel is hearing. And I think there's a missing element. I think alongside the statements of recognition of a Palestinian state, which are perceived in Israel as a victory for Hamas and a blow to Israel's desire to get the hostages that have been locked in underground tunnels in horrendous conditions, innocent hostages that were kidnapped on the 7th of October. It's felt like a blow in the sense of the Israeli perspective, and not there was no mention of the hostages, which of course lie at the heart of this conflict. I think if the hostages were returned, there wouldn't be a war in Gaza. And the question is, how to end the war. So alongside the recognition of Palestine, there has to be an explanation of how the existence of a Palestinian state is going to make Israel more secure. And that explanation, I can give it to you, but really it's the responsibility of those countries that are declaring Palestine as a state to do. Because if they were to explain, we are now announcing it's time for Palestine to realize a state, even though their borders, are not clearly defined at the moment. I don't have a problem with that. But I just think there's a huge, huge bit that's missing here of reaching out to the traumatized Israeli public and explaining a Palestinian state will provide your security because there will be a new regional architecture in the Middle East. Israel will have diplomatic relations with all the Arab states. That's part of the deal. And if Israel doesn't agree to having a Palestinian state, there's going to be war. And Israel needs to understand that a Palestinian state is in its own national interest. And it's not a prize to Hamas, because the plan is not to have Hamas in the government. I mean, there will have to be elections. The Palestinians will need to decide how they're going to govern their own state. And that is very complicated. I mean, Jan England in interviews today, and Norwegians, foreign minister, all the Norwegian officials and former officials that have been interviewed today failed to explain this particular point. And they just said, no, this is a boost to the Palestinian Authority. In other words, Fatah, it is the party that is in charge of the West Bank, and it is not a move that promotes Hamas. Hamas won't be part of the government. But I don't see how they can say that, because it is up to the Palestinian people to decide who is going to be in their government. And
it seems incredibly unlikely, Nomi, that Israel would tolerate anything that involved Hamas being in the equation, though, doesn't it?
Correct.
And possibly quite rightly.
Quite rightly, no, I fully agree. So this is what I'm saying is the missing part here. Sure. And that's why you're seeing such an extreme reaction from Israel. And you can understand from the Israeli point of view, without an explanation of how this excludes Hamas, which is what the Norwegian officials, including the foreign minister, have been saying. Also, I think he said it to your colleague Francois Picard a couple of hours ago. So it's not only in official statements, it's also in all the interviews. So if you have Hamas out of the equation, how do you ensure that Hamas are out of the equation?
Nomi, let's now hear from. Let me stop you for a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, and let's hear from the Norwegian foreign minister speaking to us a little earlier.
The government has decided that Norway will recognize the state of Palestine. Norway's recognition will come into force on the 28th of May. Norway will therefore regard Palestine as an independent state with all the rights and duties that this entails. A Palestinian state is obliged, in line with international law, to live in peace within secure, internationally recognized borders and to comply with all relevant UN resolutions.
Not the Prime Minister, sorry about that. But I think the message, as you've been saying, isn't quite coming through, is it? That basically.
Correct. I think, and that's missing, and I think it's very important, and that's why you're getting the reaction that you're getting in Israel, not only from the current extreme right-wing government in Israel, but also from the center and the left. So I think it is problematic. I think you need to look at this holistically, and you also don't forget it's coming on the heels of a decision by Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, on Monday, when his team was about to board a plane to Israel to discuss the indictments, to discuss Israel's cooperation. Instead of boarding the team, he gave an interview to Christian Amanpour and announced that he was issuing requests for arrest warrants from the pre-trial chamber. That's just the International Criminal Court's long procedure against not only 3 Hamas officials, but the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of the State of Israel. So you can understand that, this has been a week in which there have been announcements made that were not expected. And taking it all in context, I think there needs to be a slightly further explanation about the whole process.
Because we're going to hear now from Pedro Sanchez, Spain's Prime Minister, his words on what he said. Then we'll get your reaction to that.
If anything is clear to me, it's that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not working towards peace in Palestine. Fighting against the terrorist group Hamas is legitimate and necessary after the events of October 7th. But Netanyahu is causing so much pain and so much destruction and so much resentment in Gaza and the rest of Palestine that the two-state solution is in danger, serious danger. Both parties that form our progressive coalition government agree and act in reflection of the majority opinion of the Spanish people. Next Tuesday, May 28th, Spain will approve in its Council of Ministers the recognition of the State of Palestine.
Of course, has pushed for a blanket EU recognition of Palestine. What do you think about what he was saying there? Is Netanyahu the problem, Nomi?
Well, I think Netanyahu is part of the problem. It's his entire coalition is a problem. I mean, he didn't have to choose, but he chose to ally himself in order to stay in power, in order to make a government with very, very extreme right-wing people, like, I think, names that you may know, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and many others, that do not believe in the Palestinian state. I think Netanyahu himself sways. He can, we've seen in Y Plantation, for example, this is an agreement that was made in 1998 in Washington, D.C. as part of the Oslo process, that Netanyahu can sway. Had he made a coalition with a center-left, then probably we wouldn't have had all of these declarations coming. We would have had a peace process. But he is the problem in the sense that he does not have a plan to end the war in Gaza, and that's very clear. So he's prolonging the war without an end game in sight, and therefore the other states, including what the Prime Minister Sanchez just said, are getting fed up and saying we can't work with him. My fear is that without talking to the Israeli people and explaining to them what lies behind this will only strengthen the right. Elections will have to be held in Israel soon. Netanyahu's not popular, but there's no guarantee that you're going to get a more left-wing government, because Israel is feeling hounded. It's feeling like it's under a witch hunt. It's feeling that no country has any empathy for the hostages. There's very little talk about the hostages and a call for release of innocent people who were kidnapped from their beds.
Nomi, we need to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Nomi Bar-Yaacov from Chatham House, Associate Fellow in the International Security Programme, among many other roles that you fulfilled, especially at the United Nations. Thank you for giving us your analysis and your depth of knowledge on the subject. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for joining us here on Apropos. That concludes this